Afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the final panel of our third annual conference. My name is Kayla Blaker, and I am a third-year law student at Harvard Law School. And we've got a really exciting keynote panel here today about the rise of decentralized finance. So I'll introduce our speakers very quickly. So first we have Andreas Antonopoulos, who is a Bitcoin and open blockchain educator and a best-selling author in this space. We have Professor Emin who teaches computer science at Cornell University and, among many things, is the co-director of IC3 and the CEO of Avalanche. We have Kyle Roche, who is the founding partner of Roche Freedman and works with companies and startups in the cryptocurrency and blockchain space. And finally, we have Eric Rosen, who is a former federal prosecutor and is now working with Kyle at Roche Freedman. These four have a great presentation planned for you all, but before I pass it off to them, let me just take a quick moment and let all of our audience members know what to expect here. So we do have the Q&A option enabled, and that's available on Zoom. It is not available on YouTube, and we welcome your questions throughout the entire presentation, but just so you're aware, we'll be addressing those questions in the last 10 minutes or so of our chat today. But yeah, with that, I'll pass it off to Andreas to start us off.
Well, hello, everyone. I guess we'll talk about the future of DeFi, and I'm very excited to be joined by all of these people here on this panel. I am very excited about this new space. DeFi is decentralized finance, and I think the best way to define it is by comparing it to what we have now, which is CeFi, centralized finance. And to me, the driving interest in this particular space is the fact that some 13% of humanity live under liberal democracies with access to strong reserve currencies and the full suite of financial services that we all enjoy. And some 87% of humanity live under either illiberal regimes or under environments without strong currencies, and by default have very little access to financial services. So the reason I'm interested in DeFi is because I think 25 years into the rise of the internet, it's about time that finance was as available ubiquitously as internet communication, open to all, without gatekeeping, without prior vetting, authorization, control, or central management. And that's why I'm interested in DeFi. Who else wants to go?
Let me say a few words about DeFi and sort of try to characterize where we are. Following Andreas is always difficult, but if I look at what's happening in the world, I see a couple of trends. One big trend that Andreas alluded to is people applying information technologies to different sectors. So you see this everywhere. When there is a big breakthrough like the internet technologies, you immediately see first self-serving or internally oriented efforts. People who are internet-oriented building internet companies. We got the dot-com boom, and it was all about dot-com technology. And then you see branching out to other sectors. You see people take IT technology, apply it to fairly prosaic things like booking a hotel, like, I don't know, hailing a taxi cab. And each and every one of these turns into a multi-billion-dollar unicorn company. And now imagine what's happening with the application of IT technologies to finance broadly. The name of that effort, in my view, is DeFi. What's really happening in DeFi is we're taking this big new hammer, this shiny new thing that we invented that has amazing properties, and we're hitting old traditional finance upside the head with it. And out of this will come a whole lot of failed efforts, sure, but also some really big breakaway successes, and in fact, quite a few of them across the board. So you see this, you will see this with all sorts of alternative assets. You will see this with all sorts of back-end L1, layer one systems. You will see this with all kinds of apps. You will see this initially with self-serving, internally oriented, capital accumulation oriented applications, followed on by all sorts of other things like Web3 applications. So that's where I think we are. Overall, I think we're in the capital accumulation stage now. we've gone past the initial technology introduction. People are now somewhat cognizant of what a blockchain is. They have some rough idea of what these things are. It's still early. Not everybody understands the concept of a smart contract and so forth. But now we're in the internally oriented, self-serving dApp applications, and it's very predictable in my view what will happen. We're going to see a decade of innovation, ending with a big Cambrian explosion of really exciting new applications based on these technologies.
Yeah, just to build off that, I mean, so from a legal perspective, where I sort of sit in this space is people have problems and they go to court to figure out what problem, how to solve the problem. And I think why one recent example of how what's playing out in the legal sphere is demonstrating the need for DeFi is what happened just a couple months ago with the GME Robinhood debacle. And I think DeFi, from my standpoint, what it is aimed at solving, and to Gun and Andreas' point, we're still very early in this stage, but it's addressing transparency in financial markets. So, and just to quickly look at what happened with GME and Robinhood and how DeFi potentially fixes that is, I think there's really interesting discussion to be had about who was wrong, who was right in the GME Robinhood phase, and there's a number of class actions that have been teed up, and the courts are going to have to unravel some really complicated issues of law and economics to determine who was wrong there, what is owed to investors, where there was wrongdoing, where there wasn't wrongdoing. But what I do think the GME situation signals is right now the market of people who are new entrants into participating in financial markets are searching for a transparent solution. Robinhood was, its namesake was sort of to change the power paradigm between rich and poor. For the past century, essentially, you needed a broker and dealer in the middle between anytime you had a transaction of somebody seeking to engage in some sort of complex transaction like a security trade, a derivatives trade. And what is really fascinating about DeFi is it eliminates that need for a broker dealer. I think I'm interested to hear what Eric has, because I think Eric's experiences and where he comes from really is like sort of the other side of the aisle, the government side. But if you go back and you look at what the Securities Act, what the Exchange Act were focused on, it was protecting investors and fostering a market where there's innovation. Securities Act and Exchange Act was written in 1933 and 1934. So we're a long time from those the implementation of those acts. And so I think what's exciting about DeFi is it is solving a century-old problem. It's going to take some time, but I'm really excited to see what the innovators in this space are going to accomplish.
What just to build on that, Kyle, and one of the things that I was interested in hearing from Gun and Andreas is sort of what makes something DeFi. I know we throw that term around. We talked about central finance versus decentralized finance, but at what level is there a sliding scale? Is something completely non-controlled by anyone versus having some control to the creators or makers? I think it's important from a regulatory point of view. But I was reading an article in preparation today. It said 12 of the 15 sort of main DeFi projects have some type of God key or something like that to enable people to go in and I guess freeze assets or do enter some type of regulatory mode over the system. Kyle and I are working on a case right now that involves, in some degree, the level of control that the project creator has over the network that they created. So I'd like to hear from Goon and Andreas to sort of define DeFi a little bit more, maybe, and see and how do creators still retain control over the project once they've sort of splashed it out into the ether.
So that's such a great question, Eric. And the exact definitions are still to be worked out with experts like you and also with regulators. I think the determining factor is going to come to us from an external point of view, but I can try and provide my technical view on this. So to me, any technology that is based on a Byzantine fault-tolerant foundation would classify as DeFi, at least from my perspective. Anything that's built from the ground up, based on a BFT foundation that allows the participants to misbehave and yet be overridden, to try to misbehave and yet not be able to do so, is at its core a DeFi technology. Now, as you rightfully point out, you can have a DeFi technology whose actual implementation, whose instantiation on a blockchain involves a God key, and now it's actually centralized. You can have one of these things that I would consider DeFi, that in actuality is not at all DeFi, it's completely centralized. And so from my perspective, I think they all, as long as they share the same foundation, I would categorize them as being in that space. And they provide a sliding scale of properties. As long as you have a centralized entity, of course, you don't get many of the benefits of true decentralization. So there is no technical threshold that I can give you that's going to say, oh, this is where the line is. This is when people stop having control. That's a social process, and I don't know how to draw that line. So what's really important to me is seeing the market reaction. We are seeing this with, for example, we're seeing the Binance chain, BSC, offer features that are very similar to Ethereum based on a centralized, essentially centralized foundation. And you also see platforms like Avalanche provide a decentralized version of the Ethereum virtual machine. And will the users actually attach a premium to decentralization? Does it even matter to the users that these applications are not able to be controlled on one chain, but they're able to be controlled on another? And we're going to see how that plays out. From my perspective, as long as the underlying technology is BFT, then that's I think in my purview, in our purview, it's interesting. It offers, even in its most centralized form, it still offers some advantages compared to a traditional client-server, single centralized finance model, right? It's at least not opaque. So there are benefits to be had even from the most derelict of instantiations, the most centralized of instantiations. But of course, I know where my heart lies, but I don't have a proper line that I could outline for people. I'm curious to hear from Andreas. I'm sure he's given this a lot of thought.
So Andreas, I think it would be helpful if we define what BFT means. I think
Byzantine fault tolerant simply describes a class of computer science distributed systems problems and a type of solution to that, which is coordination of parties that do not trust each other over communication channels that cannot be trusted. Is basically what a blockchain consensus algorithm is. Here's the thing. Right now, there are some practical trade-offs in the development of DeFi platforms. And those practical trade-offs are that because the technology is not yet mature, neither at the DeFi level or the smart contracts level, or even in many cases at the infrastructure level, creating completely autonomous systems of finance can backfire quite badly. In fact, the very first decentralized autonomous organization that was launched in Ethereum backfired precisely because there was a problem in the underlying code. Now, these problems are not inevitable. With time and maturity, the building blocks get more and more sophisticated and the problems get weeded out, which means that the degree to which these things can be decentralized increases over time. So right now there's a trade-off, which is if you put no power or levers of control in the system, then if it goes off the rails, there's no one to steer it back. and we saw that with the DAO. If you do put levers of control, then you have to be very careful about how you structure the governance. And increasingly, that's becoming a very sophisticated area of innovation as to how to provide just enough control to prevent bad outcomes. And sometimes you can tailor that control. So that control can do very few things, maybe just dissolve the system, but not actually control access to it or control distribution of funds. So today, creators are trying to balance these two options and find the right point. But here's the thing. The bottom line is that increasingly decentralized systems and autonomous systems are becoming more and more possible, and eventually they will become absolutely viable in full autonomy mode. So the line that Gun is looking for is basically going to be defined primarily by environmental pressure and context. On the one side, from the markets, how much decentralizations do the markets need for that specific application? And on the other hand, from the regulators pushing against that line. And here, I'm not saying that regulators will have the ability to define where that line is, but quite the opposite. Their attempts to regulate will push the line further and further out of their reach. Because if the market wants decentralization, it wants decentralization in order to operate in environments where the regulators have failed to serve the market. And therefore, attempts by the regulators to impose regulations will lead to simultaneously jurisdictional arbitrage and then decentralization arbitrage, meaning we will move these things outside of the jurisdictions where the jurisdiction regulators are most powerful to jurisdictions where they're least powerful, and we will move the control of the software outside of the possibility of being interfered with. So I see a future that is actually much more decentralized. And there's a question in the Q&A here, which I think is relevant to this, which is, someone asks, for jurisdiction purposes, where does a trade get settled on a decentralized platform? And the bottom line is everywhere and nowhere. And this means that the very first thing that gets disrupted and disintermediated in decentralized finance is financial regulators. They are the prime target of disintermediation and disruption because any pressure by regulators will result in this jurisdictional and decentralization arbitrage. And here's the thing. There is an enormous need in the world by 87% of humanity that has been cut out of the current economic system for these solutions. And that need will drive and override any desire by any state to strongly regulate these things, in my opinion. I think it's also a moral imperative. I don't think, despite the fact that many jurisdictions will claim to have the authority and perhaps even the power, although I think that's not accurate, to regulate these things, I believe they lack the moral authority to prevent 87% of humanity from participating in global finance, which is exactly what most regulators have done. So the big question we should be asking right now is, DeFi is by definition truly global, borderless, everywhere. And therefore, when it comes to jurisdictions, the real problem is that all regulatory efforts are by definition local and constrained. There is no universal jurisdiction, no matter how much US regulators would like there to be. And this is the primary thing that DeFi is going to disrupt.
Yeah, I want to tee something up for Eric here, because him and I were having an interesting conversation about this the other day. The point that Andreas is making, I think, for Kayla, what you learn about in law school your first year when you study con law is the advent of federalism and laboratories of democracy. That the states were originally designed to be these laboratories of democracy. And when Andreas, when I hear him, and you should for those of you who haven't listened to Andreas and Goon their talks, you should definitely go check them out. It is in many ways how I learned about the space, hearing it from these two guys. But what for how should we as practitioners and regulators be thinking about these issues? Andreas brings up a great point. If we decide because we want to be able to sanction particular regimes, and we're scared about change because it's going to inhibit our ability to have the long arm of the U.S. government. If we act from a place of fear, and the governments and jurisdictions act from that spot, innovation is going to go elsewhere. There's a lot of other jurisdictions right now that are looking to attack the U.S. as the hub of innovation in the cryptocurrency space. It's because they would love nothing more than to disrupt not only technological innovation, but financial innovation here in the United States. Okay, does that mean we just sort of sit back and say, no, well, okay, let's just Wild West, let's let everybody do what they want? No, and I think if you sort of look back and sort of the fundamental principles of law, like what should smart policy be aimed at, and I think fraud in the space is is where you should be starting, because at the end of the day, we want to protect investors, and I think that the common law principles that these countries are built on, and what a lot of regulations were designed to do is to root out fraud. And I think that that again, it serves two functions. It both protects investors and it stokes innovation. Because
hey, Kyle, due to the regulatory pressure you just applied on fraud, we just created a new category called defraud. It's decentralized fraud, which means that it's very difficult to pinpoint exactly where it's happening and who's benefiting from it. Your move.
Well, I'm going to let Eric answer that one. So
this is exactly this is exactly the challenge, right? Which is that trying to apply centralized solutions to decentralized problems fails. It fails to scale, and it fails to achieve any of the stated goals, although it does push the decentralized platforms to try to innovate elsewhere. As I like to say, you can't take DeFi out of your country, but you can take your country out of the DeFi game. And so to me, the answer is really simple. If you want to solve decentralized problems, you solve them with decentralized solutions. You crowdsource reputation against fraudsters. You crowdsource enforcement. You basically use the very same decentralized smart contract capabilities to innovate a completely new DREG, decentralized regulation, that is run by the network, not by committee.
So I'd like to just chime in on this. And I think Andreas's take is a little bit antagonistic when it comes to regulators. And I want to focus on something slightly different. Why are the regulators, that's right, rules without rulers are fantastic, Andreas. So why are the regulators there in the first place? Well, they're there to accomplish certain policy objectives. And one of the amazing things we can do in this space is actually build their desired goals into the protocols we build. And I think that's what Andreas is alluding to when he's talking about decentralized solutions. So build the protections into the underlying dApps, applications, layer ones, what have you, into the infrastructure, so that everyone can check that they're there, so that they are there by construction, and so that they are there in an inescapable fashion. Now compare that with traditional finance. You have layers upon layers upon layers of auditors. You have auditors to audit the auditors, and it screws up. It screws up almost twice a year. There's a minor screw up, and every 5 to 10 years there's a major screw up. It's like the Dole company issues. These are all well known. They even lost track of the number of outstanding shares for a company, for a publicly traded company. Even that can happen in this imperfect game of humans checking up on humans post facto. Now compare that to what we can do with blockchains, which is put the enforcement in an inescapable fashion into the infrastructure, and then obviate the need for all of this post facto regulation. And that, I think, is the big promise. So we don't just go to regulators and traditional finance people with a narrative of, well, this is here, it's unstoppable, which it is true. It's here, it's unstoppable. But also, hey, a lot of the things that you want to do, we can build into the infrastructure and accomplish in a very capital efficient manner. But
so
Eric,
I'm interested in what Eric and his former bosses would think about
I know, exactly.
Well, I mean, what's fascinating to me as both a former prosecutor who is in that business for nearly a dozen years and a current attorney on the other side now working with Kyle, is just the potential that DeFi has to severely restrict American ability to regulate. I think you see American jurisdiction is really based on two principles. One, if an American uses the product, an American citizen. So obviously, I think you could probably everyone can sort of agree that if you're purposely injecting your product onto America, then America has some ability to regulate that product. The second is simply, are you using American assets? I think you see in a massive expansion of jurisdiction recently with the Department of Justice, my old department, as well as things like the SEC, entities like the SEC, and the CFTC. Jurisdictions predicate on the use of the American banking system, where if you send a wire transfer from Japan to France, to countries that are not America, chances are that that wire transfer will go through United States at some point. In some cases, multiple times through correspondent banks, through secondary banks. If the United States alleges that wire transfer was the product of some type of corruption overseas or something like that, that provides a basis for charging money laundering, regardless of whether you intended to use the American banking system or not. That basis for jurisdiction is eliminated almost with decentralized finance, where you have a peer-to-peer transaction. The U.S. will, in some cases, and I'm not saying whether this is good or bad, will stop becoming the world's policeman in certain respects. Some people can say, great. Some people will say, well, the world does need some type of policeman to catch people for crimes that other countries might not have the resources to go after. That's obviously a debate that people will have. But I think everyone can agree that decentralized finance will severely weaken U.S. ability to reach into jurisdictions that aren't their own and punish people for actions that took place entirely on their own soil.
Yeah, I think this conversation is worth having. But I think it's also important to start the conversation on a basis of truth and fact, which is, if we start the conversation with, you can't do this, you shouldn't do this, and therefore you won't do this. Well, sorry, we're already doing this, we can do this, and you can't stop it. Okay, so let's start the conversation on that basis. The emergence of decentralized finance and the emergence of decentralized money happened. We can't pretend it didn't happen. We can't undo the fact that it happened. We all live in a world in which it happened. So now the question is, how do we best use, as Gun said, the tools that are given to us by this technology and really look at the incredible opportunity we have here to engage the productive capacity of 6 billion people who have been cut off from the financial system through geopolitics, through inability to scale technology, to scale regulations, to scale the political environment, or through direct oppression by their own governments. If we're worried about dictators using decentralized finance, what we do is we make sure their people can use decentralized finance so that the dictators have something bigger to worry about than America. They have to worry about their own people using decentralized finance. If we worry about narco-terrorists using decentralized currency, then what we do is we give the farmers who are planting coca the ability to use decentralized currency to escape from under the thumb of the narcos, et cetera, et cetera. For every category of problem where so far we have considered the only way to solve this to apply centralized pressure with a degree of moral authority that leads to hubris and corruption, in my opinion, we can instead look to decentralized solutions by empowering people to escape poverty and oppression and economic exclusion. A world in which 87% of humanity does not have access to just the basic tools of financial empowerment and building their own future is a dangerous world. And so there's two aspects to this. One is the fact that our regulations as they exist for centralized systems do not achieve their stated goals. And that's inescapable. As Gun said, every 10 years blows up in our face. We discover, Bernie Madoff was the head of the regulatory agency supposedly regulating Bernie Madoff. Not only is that the problem, the bigger problem is the externalities. The bigger problem is not only do these things not achieve their stated goal, but they result in a poverty trap, economic inequality and exclusion that has massive implications. The cost of doing KYC AML to have kind of a bourgeois feeling of safety in Columbus, Ohio, is $1 trillion in direct regulatory costs per year, and 6 billion people not being allowed to trade their labor for money, or the brilliant kids in Nigeria who just invented the new startup not being able to get funding because they don't have sufficient documentation to be authorized or be an accredited investor. That system is broken, and it's broken to a point where it creates a dangerous world. And so I think DeFi is not simply a matter of how do we contain DeFi? No, how do we empower DeFi to build a better world?
So I want to build on that, and I want to draw the analogy to the early days of the internet. So and actually the World Wide Web, to be specific. So that's what really allowed the internet to go mainstream. As soon as the internet started going mainstream, we started getting a very, very big fight over privacy on the internet. Everybody, every institution, everybody with a stake in this whole thing ended up getting first, having their feathers ruffled. Every senator who ever got a negative comment on the internet from an unknown person, their first reaction is, this is a very common boomer reaction. Who is that? Who just said that to me? Why did they say this terrible thing? I want to know who it is. And we got bans, proposed bans on encryption on the internet. We got proposals for driver's licenses for the internet. A driver's license for the internet means you have to very, very concretely have an identity tied to every endpoint. Every single comment you make, they want to be able to track so that when you say something terrible, that they want to come after you, etc. None of these ideas came to pass. And so I want to talk a little bit about David Clark. So he's a Turing Award. He's one of the pioneers of networking. And he views the world through three lenses, the online world, through three lenses that are competing with each other. And one of these forces, there are three forces, he says. One of them is the government/military industrial complex. There are a set of people out there who want to know everything, who want to regulate everything. Okay, and so some of it is for ostensibly good reasons, some of it for self-serving reasons, depending on which jurisdiction you're in, which country you're in. Another center is the commercial center. So commerce has its own needs, and so it's much more powerful than the first one. Right? Think about the combined power of industry in the US compared to the government's power. And then the third one is what he calls the softer lens. It's the humanity. It's you and me and everybody on the internet. We have needs. We're not as perhaps well organized, but we're stronger yet than the commercial interests, which are stronger than the governmental interests. Anytime you have an explosion and a disruption, you see the same progression. The very first reaction is governments coming in, trying to ban things. The second one is commerce coming in and saying, wait, don't do that. Do not ban encryption on the internet. That would ban VPNs. And if I can't do VPNs, I can't have a giant corporation. And that was what pushed against encryption. It was, yeah, sure, we all organized it, etc. But it was really the commercial interest that came in. So when you have an alliance of commerce with people, with the softer lenses, then suddenly you can put pressure back on those very base instincts in people who are not familiar with technology, who don't have the vision to see that technology through and to work with it. So in my view, we're going through the same thing. We're seeing the exact same things. The very first reaction by any regulator will be, can I put a lid on this? And can I ban this somehow? Let's pass a stablecoin act. Let's get to know everybody. Let's have a driver's license for the blockchain. That's very normal, very natural. And soon you're going to see commerce come in and say, look, we're making so much money. We're raising funding through blockchains. We're doing so much here that you shouldn't put a lid on this. That's crazy. What the heck are you doing? And suddenly there will be big, immense push. And of course, there is the retail as well. They are getting things out of this that they could not have gotten any other way. They have transparency, auditability, and a whole bunch of other properties that no other system gives them. I don't want to occupy the floor too much, but this is at least my view, colored by David Clark's observations.
So Gun, Andreas, earlier you said, in response to my fraud comment, defraud. And so, a lot of the audience is lawyers. And so, Aaron, you're outnumbered here. You've got 3 lawyers on this Zoom conference with you. One of the things lawyers do is conflict resolution. Gun and I go out to get dinner, and Gun says, I forgot my wallet. It's, we get a $500 dinner.
Wait, he's done that to you too?
And Gun says, Kyle, look, I got this. Can you cover it for me? Okay, great. But we're in a DeFi world now. And so I can't, Gun doesn't pay me back. And so I need to figure out a way to get my money from Gun. And Gun thinks, what do you mean? I didn't say I was going to pay you back. And so we need, as society, as humans, yes, it's when Gun was talking about the third, the humanities, we hope that all of us sort of get along and we can engage in commercial transactions, but sometimes there is conflict. And what do you see? And Gun, I'm interested in your thoughts on this as well, because with Avalanche and with sort of the growth of what decentralized protocols are able to do, what is the solution to conflict, decentralized conflict resolution? Or do we need to resolve conflicts anymore?
Well, we do. Absolutely, we do. And I look at it in terms of a progression of complexity. So when it comes to very, very simple things, like, did the transaction happen? Is the money owned by Gun or is it owned by Kyle? How much money is owned by Gun? How much money is owned by Kyle? Those kinds of things we've already resolved with blockchains. So by using game theoretical mechanisms of incentives and disincentives, we solve these things at the blockchain level. These are basically transactional justice that occurs. If I own Bitcoin or Ether, I can prove mathematically that I control the keys to that. That's it. Now, we can then take that a step further. We can say, well, how about we use that to put in place some more complicated structures? So let's say we're doing a real estate transaction. In a traditional real estate transaction, if I want to buy a house from Kyle, I can't give him the house and he can't sign over the title because we have a race condition. And it's a deadlock situation where basically if I give him the money first, then he can run away with the money. If he gives me the title first, I can never give him the money, and then we have this problem. So in traditional finance, what we do is we use a third-party escrow, but this third-party escrow is a trusted third party who, by the way, charges 5% to do that, or some outrageous amount. And the reason they have to be trusted and they charge a lot is because for a period of time, they actually have custody of my money and custody of the title, and they're just disinterested and regulated. Well, in a blockchain space, we do that with multisig. We create a 2 of 3 multisig. Let's say Gun is our escrow agent. So the 3 of us creates a multisig. It takes 2 signatures. And here's the really interesting thing. in that scenario where Kyle, I, and Gun have 3 signatures and it takes 2 to release the money, I can put the money in, and I know that that Kyle can't take it out without me signing or Gun signing. But here's the thing: if Kyle gives me the title, then we can resolve this without any interaction with the escrow agent. So 99% of cases, which are solved amicably, you just execute the transaction as expected. So Kyle and I signed because we managed to exchange title, and so therefore we exchange money. If there's a problem, then Gun can come in and decide to side with me or side with Kyle to sign out the money. But and then there's the other catch. On his own, Gun never has custody because Gun only has 1 key and it takes 2. So we've basically taken a traditional dispute resolution mechanism or control mechanism and we've elevated it to make it fail less often, to involve less trust in the participants, and to still be able to resolve the basic transactional conflicts. We can keep moving that bar higher and higher. And the way we do it is through complex programmable interactions called smart contracts, which is the foundational component of DeFi. It's not going to solve anything. So then we go to the final point I have to make, and I'll just wrap it up very quickly. We can also build dispute resolution and arbitration networks that use these kinds of voting and governance mechanisms and escrow mechanisms to resolve disputes. And we can do this under already established legal doctrine. We can do it under the international arbitration treaties, and we can have selected arbitrators that may even be anonymous who participate in arbitration and resolve disputes. And you can embed that into smart contracts. The advantage of that is that you have a system that is by definition global, that has a fallback into national jurisdictions for, if you say, well, you can't take my Bitcoin because I have the keys, they're like, okay, well, we'll take your, we'll come and repo your Lambo. And 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. So you can fall back into the physical world with court enforcement. We're not going into a lawless place where it's the Wild West. In fact, what we're going into is an environment in which we have a lot more rules without having as many rulers, which is the message on my mug. Outcomes are much more predictable because they're determined by rational incentives. And for most transactions, we don't need dispute resolution. And where we do, we can do that within the confines of this system.
So, yeah, I think Andreas pointed out some technological measures to as that one would have to employ as one goes from centralized finance to DeFi. I want to add a little bit more to that in terms of measures that people have employed. Not every instrument, not every interaction in the real world is modelable or is a good fit for blockchains and DeFi. So some things are difficult to do, and typically letters of credit, future payments, promissory notes, these are actually fairly difficult to do unless you tie it to something external, like as Andreas mentioned. So unless you bring in external assets into the blockchain, somehow it's tough to do. What DeFi tends to do to compensate for this shortcoming is they use what's called over-collateralization. So in order to engage in, let's say, some amount of transactions with borrowed money, I have to provide some collateral. And should things go adversely for me, then my collateral is up for grabs for compensation to the other side. And that up for grabs can be automated. So it's not even a costly, it's a very capital efficient resolution. So it's not always the world's best. I mean, there are shortcomings to all kinds of automated schemes, but it's a way to cut short much of the legal process and to obviate much of the red tape around conflict resolution. Is it going to be perfect? Absolutely not. There is going to be a whole bunch of things we will want to do that we don't yet know how to map onto the blockchain space. But some of these concepts are very useful. So game theoretic techniques or mechanistic techniques like the multi-sigs that Andreas mentioned, over-collateralization, we're seeing an explosion of ideas based around these concepts.
I'd like to address one of the questions that has come up. In fact, 2 or 3 of the questions seem to have a similar vein, which is, how does this not simply replicate societal inequality that already exists? The rich can buy more cryptocurrency, the rich can access more technology, therefore they will be able to acquire more of these things. And the answer in my mind is that that is absolutely the case. You can't change the fundamental structure of society or human nature. And like any other societal interaction, you will have the emergence of a power law or Pareto distribution of wealth within these systems, meaning that those who have money now can take that money and buy Bitcoin, and then they'll have more Bitcoin than other people who didn't have money to start with. Here's the difference, though, and this is a really important difference. In traditional financial systems, especially in the majority of the world where rule of law is weak and financial institutions are weak, once you have a concentration of wealth, that wealth can be directly used to buy power over the rules that govern the system and tilt the playing field to just make all of the rest of the money flow your way. Arguably, that also happens in the United States, but it happens much more intensely in other places. So the bottom line here is that, yes, money can buy you money, but in the blockchain environment, the rules cannot be modified by those who have money. So the first step of that chain, money buys money, is the same as in any other financial system. But the second step, which invariably happens in centralized financial systems where money buys power to generate more money, that breaks. That's where you can't change the rules to your benefit just by virtue of having money. Oh, that's not a universal truth. That's not, it's kind of the ideal environment, and various degrees of decentralization will achieve it better than others. But one of the, to answer one of the specific questions, which is, well, the narco-terrorist will or the narco-trafficker will have more money than the farmer, so therefore they can buy more cryptocurrency. Yes, but they won't be able to bribe an official to seize the land of that farmer if the deed is on the blockchain, or to seize the cryptocurrency of the farmer, even if it's a smaller amount, if that farmer has the keys to their cryptocurrency. So again, I'm describing an idealized situation, but one of the reasons why these things create better outcomes is because they allow you to have justice as a service that cannot be bribed. And a software-based justice system, even if it's only applied on the lowest transactional level, is much better than what we have now.
So I'd be interested in Eric's thoughts here on, so Andreas, that was really helpful in thinking about, contract, land. One of the things I've thought and I've written about is that I don't know conceptually how a blockchain solves is criminal law, and how criminal law interfaces with blockchains and dispute resolution and blockchains. Eric, we're sort of interested in your take on sort of how or how you think these new technologies and new solutions could impact criminal law or not, and how you don't think it will impact criminal law, at least here in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, having not thought a ton about this issue, the immediate thing that jumps out to me is just the fact that criminal law, unlike pretty much every other type of law, it involves an intent, and that's the key element of what makes something a crime as to what falls into the civil practice. So whether it's an intent to commit money laundering, being that that funds are illicit, and you're still dealing in financial transactions anyway, or whether it's intent to steal someone's money and commit some type of wire fraud or mail fraud. The blockchain, it doesn't really change that much. It makes it, in some instances, more even easier to track, because the wallets are obviously they're public, they're on the blockchain, and a skilled investigator, I think, as we heard in earlier panels, can track that down. But the reality is that it can be used as simply an instrument, another instrument for committing crimes. there's not much you can do to prevent. If people really want to commit a crime, there's really not much you can do to prevent that. That will simply happen. I think what's some of the interesting things that we've seen in our practice over the course of past months or years is the fact that the more things change, the more things remain the same. We still have people getting their Bitcoin or coins stolen. We still have fraud on some of these exchanges that are popping up, whether I had done when I worked in government some cases involving manipulative trading with the SEC, and we still see that with blockchain of people creating exchanges that appear to be very liquid exchanges, but in fact we see it's really some people ping-ponging trades back and forth amongst themselves with market manipulation. We call that wash trading or match trading. It occurs in all types of environments, and it certainly will occur in Bitcoin. The one thing we can say, and I think is better for sort of the blockchain as opposed to sort of other banking transactions, is the transparency, I think, in that blockchain brings. And I always thought that transparency is the one way. If you really want to reduce crime, transparency is the one way to do that. And blockchain, I think, it helps in that regard. Are there still people? I think Goon, hinted at this earlier. If people are intent on ripping you off, you're probably going to get ripped off at some point. There's not a ton you can do. And that's why I think, Kyle, you were stressing some of the enforcement mechanisms. And that's the one thing from a DeFi perspective, I'd be looking to see a little bit more about, and how we can enforce sort of rules and regulations amongst it. But, I think, it's a new emerging field. The next couple of years will tell. If people feel comfortable in trusting their assets with DeFi, people feel like there's a way to enforce if things go bad, it's going to be a great technology.
Awesome. I do want to make sure that we have time to go through some of our Q&As that are still open at the bottom. So I was hoping that we could talk about this first one from Bill that says, any thoughts on the community via voting being sufficient and final arbitrators, for transaction refutation?
So I'll take, as far as, voting on the blockchain or what arbitration on the blockchain dispute, some form of dispute mechanism, or as Andreas was saying earlier, you could have, pursuant to AAA or JAMS or various arbitration type rules, you could encode those on the blockchain, and then you could have arbitrators decide the outcome of a particular dispute through some voting mechanism. I think what I see when I look at different blockchains and different governance systems, I think that blockchains that are thinking about, well, there will be some changes, some sorts of decisions that should be completely democratic, but maybe dispute resolution over some very sophisticated form of technology or intellectual property dispute shouldn't be completely democratic. It should be specialists. And so how blockchains sort of design the selection of the pool of individuals who decide these, how they validate that those people have the credentials to engage in sophisticated dispute resolution. I think that is, I think we're still probably years away from that, to getting to the point where we're having arbitrators, go through a blockchain-based, verification process so that they can participate in decentralized conflict resolution. But I think that, blockchains competing amongst themselves for how to solve these types of voting solutions will be important as blockchain continues to grow and expand how it engages in financial transactions.
Well, there's a fundamental problem at the root of all of this, which is how do you prove that someone who has an account or identity online is a real person? And how do you prevent someone from spinning up 10,000 fake accounts and overwhelming a voting system? That particular type of problem is called a Sybil problem, SYBIL, and the type of attack is called the Sybil attack. In fact, that is exactly what the Bitcoin consensus algorithm or various proof of stake consensus algorithms attempt to solve. And the way they solve it is by forcing you to back your vote by something. In the case of Bitcoin, that's energy. In the case of proof of stake, it's currency. But this is a problem that is solved for some classes of problems, and it's not solved for bigger issues and at scale. Now, what we're looking at the moment, if you like, is we're still in the email era of blockchains, if we were comparing it to the internet. And you couldn't get to the social media era of the internet until you had broad availability of mobile devices and mobile data, and much more mainstream adoption among non-technical people and outside of a business domain. You need that foundation, but then you get to level 2, level 3 effects that build upon previous rounds. To the point that you just mentioned, Kyle, and also answering a couple of questions I see in the Q&A, people are asking, well, how do you do lending? How do you change the rules in governance? How do you associate credit or collateral with borrowers? A lot of these things come down to identity. Identity is still a mostly unsolved problem in the blockchain domain. And in fact, many people think it is one of the holy grail problems. If you're able to create structures that allow people to stake some form of collateral against reputations that are durable but perhaps pseudonymous, that allow them to control aspects of their identity and use it in governance systems, that's the holy grail. If we're able to do that, it solves a lot of secondary and tertiary level problems in DeFi. We're not there yet, but a lot of these things are being pursued by a lot of innovative companies trying to find ways to build projects or products or protocols that allow people to leverage the social connections or various forms of either financial or social collateral to back reputation and identities. And that opens the door for a lot of interesting applications.
So just as a historical marker here, one of the first suggestions that Itayel and myself came up with after the DAO failed on Ethereum was to add escape hatches. And an escape hatch is essentially, it's also known as a crowd oracle. It's a set of people who can vote on finality of transactions, as was covered in the original question. So that's a great idea, by the way. So it's a serious idea that has been discussed as a backstop to ensure correct operation or intended operation of smart contracts. It's a good idea. The downsides with anything based on coin voting is really twofold. One, voting is a slow process, and so your finality becomes as slow as the slowest link. So if you're going to allow people 24 hours to revert a transaction, well, then you can't spend your funds for about 24 hours. So that's a bit of a problem, and a lot of protocols and applications suffer with this. The other issue with them, of course, is coins tend to be in the hands of certain aggregators, namely exchanges. Lots and lots and lots of people trust their coins to exchanges, and therefore the exchange operators end up having the power that was meant to be deployed in the hands of regular retail users. And that's a bit of a problem. There are technical solutions to some of these, especially the latter. So one of the things that in Avalanche that we are working towards is 2 separate keys. One key to be used for staking and so forth, another key to be used for governance and voting decisions. So that even if you store your coins at a custodian, you still have the ability to vote. You do not confer to the custodian the right to vote on your behalf. So there are tricks like this that at the very lowest level can help achieve the democratization that we all seek. So it's a great suggestion, and there's a lot of technical work to be done on top of it to make it much better or perfect, even if that's
there's a very exciting amount of research happening, especially over the last 3 years, in an area of technology that is adjacent but very, very strongly related to both DeFi, identity, voting, governance, and regulation of these things, called zero-knowledge proofs. And this area of technology is fascinating and has progressed by leaps and bounds, because we now actually have platforms where these types of solutions can be applied in real life. Zero-knowledge proofs allow people to cryptographically prove the validity or truth of a statement without revealing something. So one of the areas you might have there is being able to, for someone to vote and be able to prove that they voted without revealing who they voted for, or someone being able to audit a vote and count that all of the votes were counted, all of the people who voted were counted, but no one knows who voted for who. So these are fascinating kind of application cases for primary cryptographic research. And one of the things that's really interesting about DeFi and the blockchain space as a whole is that for those of us who have been interested in cryptography for decades, we are now truly in a golden age of cryptography research, because we've never had the access to capital, primary research, and user base all arriving simultaneously. And things are moving very, very fast. So even things that we might not see the immediate solutions today, we might wake up tomorrow morning, read a paper that's in preprint and go, aha, wow, they solved it. And you know, that aha moment is the one many of us had when we read Satoshi Nakamoto's problem. After decades of studying that area, I was like, oh, aha, they solved it. And we keep having these moments. So one of the things to realize here is that DeFi isn't done by any stretch of the imagination. We are in the foothills of the foothills, and there is a Mount Everest of innovation ahead of us. And none of us know where this is going. That's one of the reasons it's so much fun to be in this space.
Awesome. Yeah, this has been really fantastic. I'm hoping that each of you could take a couple of moments and say some closing thoughts. And then especially for Eric and Kayla, I'd love to hear more about the need for lawyers in this space and how some of the law students in our audience can get involved, and kind of any sort of advice that you could pass on to those audience members.
Yeah. So, you know, I think Andreas gave a great pitch for why lawyers should get involved in this space. Is we're at the foothills of the foothills, and we're climbing towards Mount Everest. And anytime you have competition and money, lawyers tend to follow. And I think right now it's an incredible time to be thinking about these. You know, the first year of law school, you think, you know, you study tort law and contract law, and you think about the fundamental reasons for why humans centuries ago created these rules, and you sort of have these aha moments. Oh, okay, this is why you know, we have the concept of mutual assent for a contract, and this is why you know, conversion and trespass laws originated. And I think right now, from a legal scholar standpoint, what is happening in the blockchain space is absolutely fascinating. I was very fortunate when I was in law school. My background was in engineering, and when I got, it was not quite as early as the two gentlemen, Goon and Andreas, but I read the Bitcoin white paper in 2012, and in law school was fortunate that I had a professor, John McGinnis, who took an interest in the space with me, and we were very fortunate to write a number of articles together. And those sort of, and this was at a time where I don't think the legal profession was really paying attention to what was going on in blockchain, and the sort of fundamental issues Professor McGinnis and I were examining was, well, why do we have money? Why do we, well, like, what's the reason for this instrument? And how does it relate to legal ordinances? How does it relate to law? And those are fascinating issues, both from an academic standpoint and from a practitioner standpoint. I think what I would tell anybody in this who's in law school right now is you should be focusing on these issues. You should be, even if blockchain isn't the area of law you want to go into. If in the late 90s, the internet changed everything about law, changed Westlaw, came about, like researching case law became a lot easier because of the internet. The internet changed law, period. We wouldn't be able to have in a pandemic oral arguments over Zoom conferences if it wasn't for the internet. And so what I would tell, and what I've told law students every chance I get get the opportunity and the honor to speak with at institutions, it's pay attention to this stuff. It is going to change some of the fundamental principles of law, but and how we as practitioners engage in with and examine commercial transactions. But it's an opportunity. It really is an opportunity for lawyers. So,
yeah, I'd like to say what I say when I'm asked about career opportunities. I say, listen, this technology will only impact professions and industries that are related somehow to money. There you go.
I'll be brief. It's hard for me to pinpoint an industry and in the legal sector now that it can impact so many different types of practices, from transactional drafting contracts and figuring out deals to lawsuits that our firm is involved in dozens. I don't want to underestimate there, but dozens of lawsuits on whether from simple breach of contract to whether someone's engaged in fraud, to the interaction of the regulatory state with the CFTC, SEC, DOJ, FinCEN, to obviously criminal law and prosecutions. It's not going away. It's going very, very fast. And if you want to secure a career, I think in the legal field, especially, studying blockchain, becoming familiar with the regulations, and just having an open mind on what to do will be highly profitable for you.
Goon, do you have any closing thoughts?
Yes, I'll also be very brief. So first of all, I know that this is a predominantly law audience. Very first thing I want to say is thank you for your interest in our nerdy portion of distributed systems that suddenly blossomed into something much bigger. So quick advice. This is an exciting area. This is an extinction level event for a lot of old incumbent processes. It's an incredibly empowering event for participants. It's an incredibly empowering event for many regular citizens to achieve transparency into the operation of their governments, to achieve transparency to their counterparties, and to stop being serfs, to stop being essentially beholden to people who provide a service, and to cut them out and replace them with well understood or understandable contracts. So as with anything involving money, and as with anything involving new technologies, there will be lots and lots of examples to draw from when you want a bad example. This area does attract a certain level of fraud, a certain level of misbehavior that nobody wants to see. But never ever forget that, as with any new technology, that is often the case. And at the end of this all there's a dream, there's an achievable, very, very real goal of a much more just, much better society built with these tools in mind. So with that, I want to encourage your further study of the topic. There's so much underneath, and a lawyer who's in command of law and blockchain technologies is a sight to behold, as I've experienced with some of the gentlemen on this panel and in my other dealings with other friends. But there is much to be had there. So I very much want to encourage anybody who's interested.
Great. Thank you so much to all of our panelists, both in this session and throughout this day. This has been a really great educational, informative conference. So thank you so much for being part of it. And I'd also like to say thank you to all of our audience members, both from the law school and outside of the law school, that have come and participated today. We've had some really awesome questions and conversation throughout all of these sessions. This is our last session of the day, but if anyone is looking to rewatch or catch a session that they missed, all of them will be posted on our YouTube channel and on our conference landing page that you use to get to these within the next day or so. And then we'd also love for you to follow us on Twitter to stay updated. We're fairly active. It's Harvard Law Blockchain on Twitter. So yeah, thank you very much.
And thank you, Kayla.
Thank you, Andy.
Have a good day, everyone.